From my recent video on phone tracking, I made it absolutely clear that big tech is surveilling you, spying on you, recording every action, then using that data to pigeonhole you into cohorts so information you see can be manipulated. Then they have a belief map that pinpoints every user so they know who's thinking what, where, exactly. Very powerful and very dangerous information to be in the hands of some powerful corporations, especially those in cahoots with the FBI. And this is making many of you angry because you thought this was a free country. One person responded by strongly suggesting that big tech should bring it on, track all you want, since he wasn't going to hide anything. He said he'll post his name and address too, but his opinions will be provided publicly. His voice will be heard. Nothing in what I teach suggests that we should be turned into a passive, cowering populace. This aggressive response by this person to the systemic abuse of our freedoms by big tech is commendable. But the offered solution to fight back openly by ignoring the big tech tracking problem and just saying, bring it on, is misguided. The true bullet that hurts big tech is the application of privacy. Privacy doesn't mean I'm telling you to shut up and be quiet and cower in a corner. Privacy means taking away the capability of big tech to identify the voice accurately. Privacy means knowing how to speak loudly and knowing when not to speak. Privacy means being smart and truly understanding how big tech tracks us and beating them at their own game. Privacy, however, uses guerrilla tactics and is aggressive. Privacy can be turned into a game. It can be fun, and there's no illegality here. Stay right there to learn about how to use social media guerrilla tactics to protect our freedom of speech. This is something I talk about in so many videos that makes this channel consistently different. Privacy doesn't equate to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is about not letting anyone see your information. However, simply hiding your information results in silence. Silence is an acceptance that people with an opposing point of view can speak, but you can't speak because you have to hide. This channel teaches you to understand the problem in a way that no other channel is able to communicate clearly because many don't truly understand how to attack the problem. I'm not telling you to hide. I will make this clear. I don't worry about you spreading your opinions, ideas, and feelings to big tech. But what I'm trying to address here is called attribution. This is when big tech is able to attribute this specific piece of information to the voice of a particular person. And to fight back against big tech, it is important that they be prevented from identifying precisely where that voice is coming from. Just like when guerrillas hit the powerful military power with sneaky side attacks, that is sometimes what it takes. They must not know where you're coming from. First, let's start with understanding how big tech is tracking us. Though many platforms are always attempting to track us, there are actually only two platforms that can significantly track our activities on the internet and file our identities into cohorts. These are Facebook and Google. So we will focus our guerrilla tactics on these two. Facebook is a platform based on the requirement of a real identity. Because of this, it is already automatically dangerous, given our objective. Facebook has a powerful infrastructure that goes beyond Facebook itself. Facebook profiles every post you make, every like, and attaches that knowledge to your identity. Facebook has a collection of photos that is far-reaching and has had facial recognition applied. Thus, your connections to people are now digitally transcribed. Facebook contact lists ensure that not only do they know you, but they know who you know. And this knowledge extends to phone numbers and possibly even home addresses. Additionally, you willfully assert your relationships with people and call them relatives. You interact with people with other known data like locations and known schools and employers. Most of you on Facebook will dutifully use that same phone number as your two-factor authentication on that platform, so they can always confirm that your identity matches their contact list. Facebook is able to track your movements on the internet because of the presence of the Facebook like button on many websites. This is not some benign feature. A Facebook like button is actually facebook.com embedded in those web pages, thus enabling Facebook to recognize if one of their users have been there. Facebook has done extremely aggressive moves to track who is near whom, including in the past tracking MAC addresses of phones of users with Facebook accounts. They were able to recognize who's meeting with whom or who's in the same Target or Walmart store at the same time. Unfortunately, there is no solution for Facebook. Since identity is the culprit here, this platform is too dangerous and cannot be fixed. This identity is transferred to your matching Instagram and WhatsApp accounts too, by the way, so all these are dangerous. So the only guerrilla tactic for Facebook is to leave immediately. Now, Google is at the very heart of big tech tracking. While Facebook is beginning to lose its luster, especially among young people, Google is still riding strong. Let's analyze the Google tracking infrastructure for a moment. First, realize that Google has a single login for all Google-related platforms, from Google Androids to Google Chrome to Google Docs, Google Search, YouTube, Gmail, Google Translate, Google Analytics, Waze, Google Private DNS, and a ton of other platforms. Everything is connected together by a Google ID. The ability of Google to follow you around the internet is epic. This is not something you can ignore. Interestingly, the way Google has decided to track us with this Google ID is focused like a laser beam on a very specific approach, and that is to track your phone. It doesn't matter if you have an iPhone or Google Android, the technique is the same. The approach is to require you to identify yourself on a Google platform with your phone as your authentication device. Whether you use a phone number or Google app is immaterial. The real goal is for a Google app to know it is you. The technique used is generally known as cross-device tracking. Google forces you to use two-factor authentication, which requires a phone. Once you agree to this connection, the Google app on that phone then knows where you are and what you're doing at all times. If you use a computer and are logged in, Google can see that your phone is nearby and can guarantee that you are the one on the computer. As I discussed in my phone tracking video, the tracking on a phone is very pervasive. Non-stop location tracking, cell tower tracking using supple, IP address tracking, phone identity tracking including discovering the phone serial numbers like the IMEI and so on. The Google ID is very effective at tracking. When you log into any Google platform like YouTube or Gmail on a browser, the browser retains that Google ID on that browser. It doesn't matter that you open a new tab on a browser. The website you click on will likely have Google code embedded in it, typically Google Analytics or Google Ads. And that will sense your Google ID. So every move you make, every click, every internet action is recorded and attributed to a Google ID, and that Google ID is also attributed to a specific phone. So how do you beat this tracking? Several things have to be done, and in combination, it will make you disappear from Google's prying eyes. Number 1, Google activity controls. First, state your intent not to be tracked by going to Google Activity Controls and turning off tracking on everything, including YouTube, location tracking, and so on. This in itself will not protect you, but there's some legal element here that's important. It gives Google a heads up that you want the tracking to be limited. They will still track though, so there are more steps. To go to Google Activity Controls, On a browser logged into Google, just search for Google Activity Controls and you will see Activity Controls Google account. And there you can turn off the various tracking options as well as delete any current history. Do not think of this as some sort of magic bullet. This is not enough. Also, you could leave this on to see what they're collecting about you. There are moments when this could be useful. Up to you. Number 2, create additional Google IDs. A Google ID is a Gmail account, so you need to decide if you need to create a new Google ID that perhaps has no email history attached to it. It is a good idea to create a new identity, and then you can actually control the kind of information Google can know about this identity. It is important that you do not actively use the Gmail account associated with this identity for real email. Use it only for junk mail and app logins. Remember that Google actively reads your email, so whatever content is in your email will allow Google to profile you. Number 3, mobile phone with a Google ID. This is the biggest problem of all. Your Google IDs must not be associated with any active use of a phone, or Google will be doing the cross-device tracking. There are several ways to accomplish this. The most flexible way is to get a phone that has no connection to Google at all. I use a de-Googled phone, and particularly I use a Brax 2 phone. This phone is invisible to Google, so if I look at the security settings on my Google account, it will not appear. And the reason is that a de-Googled phone has no Google ID. It also does not have any Google spyware which can leak its whereabouts to Google. So basically, to Google, the phone does not exist. When I use a de-Googled phone, it's as if I don't use the phone at all. Remember that this capability is limited only to phones running Android Open Source Project or AOSP, and also phones running Linux. iPhones and regular Android phones will always leak your data and whereabouts. The alternative, of course, which is more extreme, is to not use the phone at all. Put it in a Faraday bag and bring it out only for 2FA. This is not realistic, of course, for most, since we need phones to communicate normally. However, this alternative can apply to a secondary Google ID, which is associated to a phone that is hardly used. Google will require you to supply a phone number and have some phone with a Google app. But this is a case where your newly created Google ID could be associated with an unused phone. Number 4, isolate Google in browsing. The next step is to make sure that Google doesn't see what you do on other websites and platforms. The way to do this is to use a technique I speak of often, which I call browser isolation. So to review this procedure, I use Google platforms on Chrome. Chrome is logged into Google with my preferred Google ID. Here I can use Gmail and YouTube and other Google services, but on this browser I never do anything else that's not Google. And I always operate on the principle that Google is watching, so I let them see what I want them to see. I set up another browser, let's say Chromium, but on this browser I never log into Google. The Google ID is known on the Chrome browser, but it is not known on the Chromium browser. You can use other browsers too, like Firefox, Safari, Brave, and so on. If you have another Google ID, you could choose to isolate it to another browser. My actual operational technique is to also have another browser assigned to Google, but where I never log in. This way I can freely watch YouTube without fear of tracking. Doing this procedure prevents your Google ID from leaking. Thus, Google only sees what you do on the Google platforms, which they already know anyway. This is a very simple procedure. You can do it on a phone as well, but it is not critical on a de-Googled phone, since other apps cannot see the Google ID, and no Google app will run on a de-Googled phone. Number 5, use a VPN. Now this is something heavily recommended on your own home Wi-Fi network, but not super critical when using cell data. Google uses your home IP address to identify you. So if you go to any site, Google can discover your IP address using Google Analytics and identify that it is your household even when you go to other platforms outside of Google. You can see that they track this because it is in your Google security settings. There's a history of devices there. And it will record this on any device that has a known Google ID, such as the Chrome browser described in my example. By using a VPN, Chrome will not be able to clearly identify a particular user because VPNs use IP addresses shared by many people. Cell Data also uses a shared IP address, so it too can act like a VPN, though the carrier may be able to track you. Number 6, have a new 2FA phone number. It is important that when any platform asks for a two-factor authentication phone number, that you are able to give a phone number that is not known to your contacts. Thus, this number will not appear in any contact list where your name can be verified. My Brax2 phone, for example, is dual SIM, so my 2FA texts go to a second phone number. So I've given you the basic Guerrilla tools to use. We now have to talk about strategizing how to use these tools because that part is not obvious. It is not obvious because most of you already have a well-known Google ID with tons of data in Gmail, tons of YouTube video interactions and comments, tons of search activity on Google Search, tons of social media interactions, and all clearly identified with a Google ID, and a normie phone that connects all the above to you. The question is, how do you want to identify your most public posts so that your identity is not tied to a particular cohort with an exact location? There's no one size fits all here because most of you will not be willing to make extreme moves. So I'll just suggest a few ideas here that you folks can mull over. Number 1, create a new Guerrilla identity. You could decide to have multiple identities on the internet, and you just have to become consistent with the associated behavior of these identities. For example, if you're a well-known real estate agent in town, then of course anything you post on the internet could be found, and certain comments you make publicly could harm your business, like active politicking, for example. You could choose to make one of your identities be the active politicking person. You just protect your identity in the ways I already described. This new stealth identity could talk freely on Twitter, YouTube, Gmail, and so on, but with a careful thought to hiding an identity. This means no use of a regular normie phone on that Google ID, browser isolation, and no real names used, no contact list, no phone numbers that connect to your other identity, no addresses. Number 2, defanging a current identity. Let's say you've been way too active with a current identity and you used your real name, and now your identity is all over social media. Your identity is also clear because you used a normie phone, so this Google ID is clearly tracked and you've been assigned to a cohort, likely identifying you as an extremist or activist. So how do you defang this so this identity doesn't hurt you in the future? This situation requires a more aggressive response. You need to make it appear that this identity is now inactive. Though this will not cause Google to delete associated content and history, the value to the Google algorithm will be diminished since their targeting is tied to ads. You must be active or they cannot push ads to you. This makes sense since the point of the profiling is to know how to feed you ads. If you're not active, they will not waste resources classifying you for ads. The hope here is that inactivity results in that history being archived and not used actively. How to do this? First, you must remove the connection immediately to a regular phone. Either stop using the phone or get a de-Google phone. A de-Google phone will appear to Google as if you stopped using a phone. Next, delete all your Gmail content. This is actually easier than you think. If you want to keep email history, you subscribe to some paid email service, for example, a Braxmail, and then using the Thunderbird email client app, you just drag your content from Gmail to a local folder, and all your mail is now stored locally. This removes data for future profiling by Google. Obviously, you need to stop using the email address for real stuff. You can ignore the junk mail though. Then delete this email address from any connection with other social media. Likely this email address will have your real name, so this is critical to identifying you. Use some other email address that does not have a real name. Change your username on social media to not use a real name. This will not be perfect. Likely you will have a long history of internet posts that has your real name, but you're not going to make it easy to connect your real name to what you did before. But with the exclusion of Facebook, you are able to change your username on many platforms. You cannot delete your Gmail, but you can stop using it. Number 3, decide what you want Google to see. If you have several identities with the tools I gave you here, you are at liberty to create any persona you wish. You can have a super quiet persona that does not make a peep. You can have one persona become super active on Twitter and be shouting and screaming all day. You can do anything you want, but all you have to do is protect the identity connected to that activity. If you choose to use a real name account, for example, because it is your profession, like a doctor or a lawyer, then make sure to be extremely controlled in that identity, where you only talk about things related to business. No family, no Facebook, no non-work related activity. This partitioning of information will make it hard for anyone to profile you. And even if they do, they will not get a true image of what you are. Remember that what you do on the browser will be the data associated with that Google ID. So if you click on right-wing videos and right-wing websites, then your Google ID will reflect that. But it would be interesting if you're actually left-wing and you're clicking on these things because it incorrectly categorizes you in the eyes of Google AI. In other words, you're having an opposite day. That will of course mess up the AI, and it may cause them to dump your data as being an outlier. This is called disinformation. These are choices you have. You also have the choice of doing other things in the browser, but without an associated Google ID, in which case that activity cannot be categorized. So there we are. You now have some approaches to think about. This is an aggressive approach, but it is very effective and protects your privacy in a big way. You will feel a sense of freedom immediately because you will have successfully beaten big tech if you apply all of these tactics to your life. Friends, I've talked about several tools needed to accomplish this, and knowing the needed tools, I've created products you can use. I'm not the only source of these products, but your patronage supports this channel, and I appreciate it. We have the Brax 2 phone with an open source Brax OS and completely free from Google. We have Bytes VPN to obscure your IP address and DNS. We have Brax Mail to wean you off Gmail. All these products are on my app Brax Me. The link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.